And Kurt Bardella is a Democratic strategist and NewsNation political contributor. Great to have both of you here. Fair warning, I'm battling a cold, so I'm hoping not to cough through this interview. Mick, the certification today was quick and efficient and perfunctory. It took only 36 minutes, a far cry from the scene this day 4 years ago. And today, the leader of the Proud Boys formally asked President-elect Trump for a full pardon. He's in prison, sentenced to 22 years in prison for being the driving force behind the attack. What do you think Trump is going to do?
Here's what I hope he does, Elizabeth. By the way, I hope you feel better. I'm on the tail end of norovirus myself, so I feel your pain. Here's what I hope he does, is he looks at the possible pardons for the folks involved in January 6th. Do it on a case-by-case basis. Go in and find out what happened. Find out if the penalty fit the crime, if the penalty fit the allegations, the admissions of guilt and so forth. And don't do a blanket clemency to pretend like January 6th didn't happen. There were clearly people doing the wrong thing on January 6th who should be in jail. And I think that the president should take it on a case-by-case basis and not try and sweep it under the rug. I think if he does that, history won't be well served, and it will look bad on his legacy to do it that way.
Wall Street Journal editorial page warned today that pardoning such crimes would send an awful message about Trump's view of the acceptability of political violence being done on his behalf. Do you agree with that?
I think, yeah, unless if you look at a case, look, why do presidents give pardons? They're supposed to give pardons. Again, it's a strange power. It's a power typically we give to a king, not to a president, but to sort of maybe you look at something and say, you know what, the punishment doesn't fit the crime, or something was broken in the process, something was wrong. There's a reason for clemency or for a pardon. And that reason isn't, I want to pretend the whole thing didn't happen. So I hope that this administration sits down and looks at it on a case-by-case basis. If they find people who are in jail for what seems to be too long a time for the alleged crimes, maybe those folks get clemencies, they get their sentences suspended, something like that. And I hope they don't just sort of wave a magic wand and say, this didn't happen, everybody gets out of jail free.
Kurt, there are Republican members of Congress who say Trump shouldn't issue any of these pardons, something he's vowed to do on day one. And it's worth remembering that Trump himself condemned the violence of January 6th on January 7th of 2021, when he said, like all Americans, I'm outraged by the violence, lawlessness, and mayhem.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can't be the party that walks around talking about law and order and laws have to be enforced and use it as justification for such a big parcel of the policy portfolio that the Trump administration wants to implement, and then turn around and give clemency and pardons to people who perpetrated an act of extreme political terrorism, in my opinion, on January 6th. Not saying that everyone there was a part of that, but there were a lot of them there. And so a blanket clemency, a blanket pardon, I think would send a really chilling message that, you know, this is the leader of our country and the leader of the Republican Party condoning political violence, condoning an effort to try and throw out the results of a free and fair election. What we saw today, Elizabeth, was the Vice President of the United States do what so many have done before her, and January 6th was a perfunctory day. It was something that was not an event that required 24/7 coverage until 4 years ago. And the Democratic Party here has done what the Republican Party refused to do 4 years ago. It's interesting that we had this election running up to it. All we heard from Republicans were, this may not be on the up and up. This could be a rigged election. This could be a stolen election. And the minute that the election was called, all of that went away. So does Joe Biden and the Democrats, by the way, get credit for having the most integrity-filled election in American history?
I don't know. We'll see. Listen, hey, Mick, Trump's incoming chief of staff, Susie Wiles, is warning that there will be no chaos in this new Trump administration, saying, quote, I will not tolerate backbiting, second-guessing inappropriately, or drama. She also promised a, quote, much less chaotic and dysfunctional West Wing than in the first Trump term. You were one of the chiefs of staff in the first administration. What do you make of this? I assume she's not talking about the time you were in charge.
Listen, this was a textbook sort of, this is what she's supposed to be saying, and I hope she's able to do it. She wants to make sure that everybody is there pulling in the same direction. It is what every chief of staff wants. And what she's talking about is what every chief of staff deals with, which is people think that they're bigger than the team. Their ego is bigger than the rest of the organization, and they're there for themselves and not for the success of the president. what she's saying is absolutely right. Whether or not she can follow through on it is going to be the big test. And the key there is whether or not Donald Trump backs her up. When she walks into the White House, in the Oval Office, and says, Mr. President, I have a problem with so-and-so. They're undermining my authority here. Will the president back her up? If he does that once or twice early on in the administration, it will really establish her authority, and that would be a good thing for the functioning of the West Wing. If Trump permits folks to sort of go around the chief of staff, to sort of have their way, to have their own voice, to leak indiscriminately to the press and so forth, then everybody else will look around and go, well, if that person's doing it, I can do it too, and the whole thing will fall apart. So we'll know in a very short period of time. You'll know in the first 30 or 60 days if the new approach is working.
Yeah. Kurt, can she pull it off? Trump calls her the ice maiden, but, Axios and many, many other outlets and people have described Trump's first administration as, quote, a chaotic den of self-sabotage.
Yeah, I think anytime you're dealing with proximity to power and egos and larger-than-life personalities, and there are a lot of those that are going to be a part of Trump, too, not just at the staff level, but even at the cabinet level, looking at people like Bobby Kennedy, people like Dr. Oz. These are individuals who are not used to answering to anybody, serving at the pleasure of anybody. They're used to kind of doing whatever they want. They are their own principals. Elon Musk is also one of those larger-than-life personalities. And so when you have all of that together, when things are going well, sure, the trains will run on time. It's when things don't go smoothly, when there is that first hiccup, that first, bout with adversity, that people start kind of playing let's leak game, let's blame game, let's call the inside the Beltway trade pubs here, the Axioses, the punch bowls, Politicos, and let's get our side of the story out. And Mick's right. Once one person is allowed to do that, then the other side's going to respond. And so the true test will be the first time that happens, and it will happen. It's inevitable. Do they shut it down and hold that person accountable and lock that up? Because if they don't, it will spread like wildfire, and it'll contaminate the entire administration.
Yeah, the American people made it clear they want stuff to get done. They want people to move. They want people to shake things up, but they want stuff to get done. So.
It won't be the chaos of the Mulvaney years, dang it.
Oh, cheap shot, Kurt. Mick Mulvaney, Kurt Bardella. Great to see you both. Thank you so much.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Coming up.